So now we're going to look at transformation of cultural institutions, and we're going to look at the opportunity, even the need for cultural institutions to open up to other sectors to carry out this transformation and play a heightened role in society. So we have a roundtable discussion, 2 sections, taking us up to 1 o'clock, moderated by Marialya from Centquatre, 104. We have a first section from 11:15 to 12:15, where I'm happy to welcome Sophie KERVRAN, Director Curator of the Museum Pont-Aven from the Fishing Museum in Concarneau and Cornouaille, Agglomération. And we have Marialya, Joana IDIEDER, and then we have Abla BENMILOUD, head of National Monuments, and we have Emmanuel DEMARCY from Palais de Tokyo. That takes us to 12:15, and I'll tell you what we're going to talk about from 12:15 to 1. Same topic. And we'll welcome Delphine Hubbard, who's the deputy mayor in terms of culture and tourism in Brussels, and Emmanuel DEMARCY-MOTA, who's the head of the Paris Théâtre de la Ville. Maria, over to you.
Je vous donne les micros.
Alors, rebonjour à toutes et à...
Hello, everyone again. I suggest that you stay, those of you who are leaving, because we're going to have very exciting talks about transformation as we move from products that are made for fair trade. That's very important, of course, in museums and in cultural areas for people who have the skills and the competencies, of course. And then today, with our speakers, we're going to have some different examples of transformation of cultural institutions based on the skills and competencies. Let me, first of all, start our talks with 2 examples that will be presented by Sophie KERVRAN. You're the director and curator of the Pont-Aven and Fishing Museum in Concarneau, Cornouaille. And also Joana, you're in charge of communications at the MACVAL. So 2 examples here that will show us how we can transform tools of our cultural areas by involving local actors, local stakeholders, and then we'll ask Abla to talk to us about skills and sponsorship. And so this will be development in the National Monument, and then in charge, and then we have the person in charge of sponsorship and skills in from Palais de Tokyo for sustainable development. Now, if you all agree, then we have I'll have some questions for you, and then of course those of you out there in the audience, you're welcome to ask any questions you may have from our speakers. And I'll start then with you. I'll give you the floor. Thank you very much. I'm Sophie KERVRAN, in charge of the Pont-Aven and Fishing Museum, and outside of Paris, of course. So the museum is from 1985, renovated in 2016 in a village of about 2,500 people. Pont-Aven has become almost an AOP, with the background being the Gauguin and Synthetism painting. So it's one of the most frequented museums in Brittany, with nearly 90,000 visitors per year. The Fishing Concarneau Museum, so Chinese split here, from 81, one of the first museums in the air. First, it was association-based, and then the fortified area, the historic area of Concarneau, with several hundreds of thousands of visitors per year. So you can see 2 different museums that are touristic in nature. And then they had the pandemic that got us all thinking, of course, and that speeds up the process that was just in gestation at the time, so accelerating more than initiating with the necessity to renew, get back in touch with the local inhabitants and get them involved. And the theme of the citizen museums is today inscribed in the territory project in the, from the local municipalities' viewpoints. So the participative project, this exhibit in 2020 is Reserve Open Sesame. So we had an online vote to choose the 35 artworks, pieces that they wanted to see in the exhibit. Of course, now, we weren't the initiators of this idea. There was the Chambre des Visiteurs, the Fine Arts Museum of Rouen, and there was an exhibit in 2018, Click a Crowd-Created exhibition. And I also saw there was a recent exhibition at the Baltimore Museum of Art, Guarding the Art. This is where the curators are the guarantors of the curators were the official guards. So what we did was we had the voting, and we had a socio-cultural center. We had the members of the Friends of the Museum Association. So it wasn't historic as curators tend to describe things, but it was just anecdotal, as it were. So it was poetic, with an exhibition that was over the top of it. We had local high school kids who created podcasts. So it was really the public who was giving the orders, and they were taking control of everything without any demagoguery. And that's important to say, because that might be a sort of a watchword for today, but we imagine ideas that the public, the visitors, the inhabitants would take ownership again of their local heritage. And it raises a question. It makes us as professionals wonder, what we're doing in our own practices, how we can break that invisible wall between us, the museums, and the citizens, and how we can explain and better draw in these folks. So that's an initial example that was a full-on success. And then the second example, going to the Fishing Museum. So this museum in 2021 celebrated a 60-year anniversary, and we wanted contemporary art into this museum that was a bit old and dusty, as it were. So for Parisians, I'm not sure if we have lots of Parisians here. This might seem a bit exotic, but in Concarneau, this is sort of our daily grind, but we wanted contemporary art in the museum, and we also wanted to spotlight the museum's DNA, which is the life of a fisherman. So we put in some music. We had the Compagnie Liminale, and we had a choreographer, Laurelie Richard, and we had, after a call for projects, she gave us a documentary opera. So a lot of artistic contribution here, where we had the voice of the members of the Friends of the Museum Association, who were founders of the museum. So we had voices of fishermen. You see a former captain of a fishing boat that you can visit, the America. And so the opera company gave us operas, dance performances by the school children. So it was a sort of on the razor's edge, as we had to get the fishermen to embrace contemporary art, which we thought was a bit strange anyway, and a documentary opera as well. And then we realized that there was a lot of engagement, a lot of involvement, and then we showed this in the local cinema. So it was, as it were, quite relevant to bring together and forge connections and forge ties amongst these people. So my catalog, then here we have the participative example, and then we have this one outside the walls. And this was using the Orange Foundation with a determination here as well. We're not necessarily the inventors of it, but we wanted to take the artwork outside of the walls to retirement homes, prisons, and so on and so forth. But we imagined the traveling exhibition as participative as well. So the mediators were there, as it were, to welcome audience, and perhaps we had some people living with impairments. We had retirement homes and getting them involved, and then sort of, as it were, mediating that based on their exhibition, what they wanted to see and what they wanted to show on their premises. And then so the Pont-Aven, we have this, the museum comes into your home, so we have a digital section with access to virtual visit as well, but it's not a typical virtual visit that we would have produced by a service provider like you have here in this trade fair, but it's a participative virtual visit in partnership with the Fab Lab from Concarneau and Libus. You know, these are buses that go around the rural areas to provide internet access in certain age categories or social categories where there's no access. And then the local mission called Guarantee Jeunes, Guarantee Youth, a mission that helps young people get jobs. And so they were trained in creating these virtual visits. And they conducted the virtual visit by recording comments on the artwork. And so the goal was more than achieved, because most of these young folks didn't even realize that there was a museum there. So they spent several days, and as it were, took ownership of the artwork. And now one of the youth who was involved is now the greeter in our museum. And here's a cultural participative project. So we have, amongst our collection, a lot of correspondence with artists. We have Gauguin, who complains a lot about the weather at Pont-Aven, and Charles Filiger and his sponsor, his patron, and a lot of correspondent that's not known by the specialists, but we brought in some of the press about a dozen times in the evening to come into the museum and give voice to this correspondence. So defining these moments, it was very friendly, very convivial, warm. People came together. Local inhabitants took ownership of their collection because it is their collection. They're not my collections. And additionally, there was collaboration with an artist, an actor, a theater actor, podcasts that are today on our internet website and fulfill two roles: one scientific, making people aware of this correspondence, and a more public initiative, which is getting locals involved in their heritage. So I have a very motivated team, and we want to continue the touristic attraction of this. And as we heard in the last roundtable discussion, we don't want to just have the same old type of footfall we had before, just coming into the museum, going out. We want the connection with our citizens. We want these to be citizen-based, citizen-owned museum. Thank you very much for those very inspirational examples. We see that participation can be at several different levels: voice, writing, inventing, reinventing, and transporting the museum. Now I'm going to give the floor over to Joana to tell us about another example. Well, no, I just came here to see you. I don't have any images. I just wanted to talk to you. Hold on a sec. Just want to see. Hello, I'm Joana DEMARCY. I'm from Mathieu, a contemporary museum of the Val-de-Marne in the Greater Paris area. So I want to talk about museums generally speaking, but a very specific action that we carried out. I just want to tell you a story, because like all the museums here, we have tons of ideas and tons of initiatives to include the maximum amount of people in what we do and get the most people in our buildings. But I want to tell you something specific. The story of MacVal, the museum, it's a contemporary art museum of the Val-de-Marne, inception 2005, so 16 years old at this stage. So it's a teenager, right? With very lively, very lots of vitality. And the museum is fortunate to be established in an area where they didn't really want a museum. So Vitry-sur-Seine is a southern suburb of France, and it's always had connections with art, because we had a lot of artists who lived there over several years, because the department itself has been an attraction for artists. So lots of workshops, lots of artists' studios to work, and in the department, as soon as we had decentralization, the government made up several different counties in that. There was assistance for the artists buying their work and creating that as of 1922, acquiring a collection of contemporary art. There was a very nice collection, and what they wanted to do was connect the artists with their public, with the territories, with the people in Val-de-Marne and beyond, with the ambitious idea of creating the museum right in the middle of the Val-de-Marne, meaning Vitry-sur-Seine. And it's true, the ambition to create the museum it's a place that, it's a space that was just sort of like one of Her Majesty's objects, and amongst the sort of population that could be interested in art and culture, but in fact they weren't expecting to see this edifice in the middle of their county department. It was fortunate because it enabled us to think, to look, to invent, to listen. An entire population that comes to museums often through school, through leisure activities, through youth centers that are dynamic, and they want to have make the artistic connection for youth. But there's a lot of heart in it, a lot of taste, and that audience sort of grows up with a museum. These kids grew up with our museum. They saw it being built when they were kids in school, and now they come back sometimes with their own kids. So there's a very intimate connection with our museum. So it's this context where I wanted to tell you the story, the most recent experiment, that we're conducting, because we consider it a bit like a laboratory, wanting to make it up by who we are and we want it to represent us. It's sort of this audio guide. It's multilingual, and it's similar to what I've heard before about the commitment. And as we said, what if we invented different ways of talking about the museum and in the museum and communicating with the museum? So that's what we wanted to develop. And so over the past 15 years, everyone's been working on the installation and the development of audio guides that are quite specific, because we have the artists speaking directly on the audio guides, because we think if there's an interest in having contemporary art, it's working with living artists. Unfortunately, they're all not living, but many of them are still alive. So we have the possibility of letting the artists speak about their own work in the audio guide. And that's something that the public appreciates a lot, to hear the actual artists speaking about their work. So we create these audio guides, and we were looking at working in a different way, and we're trying to figure out how we could come up with these multilingual artist guides, and we're working on that for a specific part of the public. And so it's an allophone group. These are people who have whose native language and mother tongue is not French, but they've grown up in their family with a different language. Sometimes they've just come into France and haven't been here for very long, and they want to include their language in the visit and the discovery of the museum. So this means they're not necessarily rare languages. Sometimes we have rare languages, but not necessarily. But they're languages that you don't find easily in audio guides. So we're at the second session now. We've got languages like Malagasy from Chad, the Congo, and also we have Italian, Brazilian. I'm sure that you like that. You appreciate that, Marialya. Yes, I am part Brazilian, part Russian. So yeah, I was really moved by that. So they're not necessarily rare languages, but they're sort of rare for us and in our audio guides. And so it's the second phase of what we're doing. And we're working in the Asian languages. So we have women, mostly feminine this time, mostly ladies this time. It was mixed the last time, but so more women this time around. And so these are Asian languages. We've got Vietnamese, Korean, Chinese, and spontaneously we've got Catalan. So we have someone who is in our area who offered to do those recordings. So these are languages that aren't common, but it's about working on not just the language, but the narrative, working on the texts themselves. So you tour the museum with these folks, and we read the descriptions. We have explanations about the collections and that. And so they're the indications and the directions. We want them to be, the descriptions, we want them to be very clear. And you have to have this language that is museum-based, but it's our own. And we try and keep it as simple as possible. But there's vocabulary that's specifically related to museums, to the exhibition, and to the art itself, and the world of art. And we try and make it as simple as possible, but we don't realize sometimes we go a bit too far, maybe even too severely far, to keep it reliable, serious. So these people, when they come in, they have different viewpoints. They come from different cultures and different sensitivities. And so they respect the text that they're reading, but they feel that there's a distance. So what they suggest then is then interpreting the work, the piece, not only by a common text that's been drafted by lots of different people, but then translated into their individual languages. So all these phases are extremely enriching for the audience, as it is for us, because our mediators are also our lecturers, and they're very keen to the viewpoint we have on the works and how they can be engaged. So it's a way of taking ownership of something that seems very far from their culture, but yet there's their own intimacy and their own closeness. So often these people come back and they bring their families back to see the exhibition. They bring their parents, and they are the guarantors of that, the bearers of that language, and they're very proud to see that their language is a part of the museum as well. So it's a sort of a loop. And we were saying that in the beginning earlier, looking at how can you imagine a different world where everyone wasn't included before, but now we want to include as many people as possible. And that's our way of making the connection here for these people. And they can be close physically, they can be far away culturally, but we're starting with those close locally. Thank you very much for that story, and we definitely want to hear more stories from Magval. Now I'm going to hand over to Abla. And the idea is that you all get to speak, and then we can have a Q&A session. That you may have questions out there as well in the audience. So now we're going to be talking about patronage, skills patronage. We talked about participation and transformation going through skills that we have in our institutions, in our museums. So tell us about skills patronage. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Abla BENMILOUD-FAUCHER. I'm in charge of the digital strategy in the national monuments in France. We've got many monuments that we restore, we curate, and where we have some public audiences. And so our role is disseminating culture. In 2019, we had 9 million visitors and 400,000 school children. And then the pandemic hit us as well, just like everyone else. And then we took that as an opportunity to launch a new project that that was really important to us, because 5 years prior, I had tried to, I worked in Orange already at skills patronage. We wanted to have the remote guided visit for schools. So 2019, I was working with Orange. I went on projects where we were working hand in hand with the teams from the cultural institutions and our orange engineers in research to develop new services. So I experienced the whole virtuous aspect of competence, patronage, gender equality, different ages, training-wise, different experiences, diversity culturally as well. So we experienced that in Orange. We had artists, engineers, and very diverse teams working. 2015 remote visits. In fact, we didn't have everything, all the elements together to be able to do that because in the national education, you had there were barriers related to networks and so on. And in 2020, we said, okay, well, I came on board to the National Monument Center, and we decided we wanted to launch this experiment for remote visits. Now, the key to making the connection with children is they said they didn't want a virtual visit. We wanted someone from the Cultural Heritage Division who could share the information, could interact with the class. They didn't want just a virtual visit. So in cultural institutions and at the CMN, based on our status, we have certain employment restrictions. So we can rarely put someone on a single project. So I had this opportunity in a patronage project with Nokia. So Patrick Bergeau, who offered his patronage via Nokia for a project. Well, it was at Nokia first, it was the competence diversification first, and then Nokia called on a HUD placement firm as well to move forward there. So I said yes right away because Patrick's background to me was very in line with the project. He was 55 years old, and I talked about a mix of ages, like older, younger people working together. I really believe that you have to have 20, 50, 60-year-olds working together. And he had an engineering background as well. So expertise in project management and complex projects as well. Expertise also in leading change and change management, also in continuous improvement. So he had a whole host of skills and competencies that were key to our project. So we launched it in a very short time frame. So in fact, we ended up starting in a sort of trial and error setting to look at 12 monuments for these remote visits, remote guided visits, two different formats. One was sort of live with the person who had a smartphone and would give the class a visit remotely, or the guide was on Zoom, and we had to digitalize 12 different monuments. And so we shared that with the educational system. We brought people on board. We had people trained because most people had never used the video conference tools yet. And so all this in a very short time frame from November 2020 to March 2021. So with COVID, I don't even know what month it is anymore. Wait, yeah, it's 2022, right? Okay, so yeah, I'm still stuck in 2020. Sorry. Yeah. It's 2022 right now. Right, thanks. So 6 months, within 6 months, thanks to Patrick and all the teams, all the guides and the educational team there, we carried out this experiment across 2,500 students, general public as well. We wanted to test the different digital technologies, and Patrick's skills there were really important because of his engineering background, we wanted to test the quality, the gap we needed to cover for the educational guides to use the new tools. And it was really fantastic because they really took this on board, and so it was really not a matter of digital for digital's sake, but it was thinking about the staging of it and making it adapted, suited to the tools, and developing their creativity. So I had a video to show you, but I don't think I'll show it right now. So Patrick produced a white paper for it, with recommendations for other cultural institutions, and we formalized the offer for schools. So we had a 98% satisfaction rate, 88, sorry, satisfaction rate. Schools who were ready and willing to do it again.
Compétences que j'ai décrites.
And the skills that I have described in my introduction were linked to the success of the project, to bringing the teams on board, to managing this project within 6 months. And this has broken silos within our organization, because I said we were the first operator, even if we are agile, even if we're only 1,400 people compared to a large group like Nokia, we're still an entity with a headquarters with 100 monuments. So all of the issues that he had to deal with the CAC 40 company, we have the same issues about bringing on board headquarters and the affiliates. So his skills were very useful to us. We have really made this offer last. But I believe my time is over, Marialya. Yes, but we can come back to your project through questions. I'm now going to give the floor to Mathieu to talk about pro bono work concerning sustainable development and CSR, even if digital is part of this. My name is Mathieu Goncourt. I'm in charge of communication and CSR for Palais Tokyo. We are not a Japanese restaurant, for those who don't know us. We are a contemporaneous art that is located in Paris. We're going to be 20 soon. It started as an association 20 years ago. Today it's an art center that depends upon the Culture Ministry, but our model is very specific. It is a company with the state as a single shareholder, and we are self-financing. So 60% of our revenue are our own revenue. They come from our ticketing. So it's the visitors that feed this revenue over time that come to visit us. It is also a privatization, because we're a great space and a large space, and we make our venue available to all sorts of corporate events and public events. And we also have some sponsoring from various patrons. So I'm going to talk about engagement, because what links all of us around this table is this question of engagement, and all of the projects that we're presenting have use. We could have committed ourselves by opening to other actors. We're also going to talk about the role of corporations in these projects and in this transformation. Companies have been present right from the start. The project that we're carrying out in Pont-Aven with your fishing museum, it is a project that is made possible by the involvement of small companies. Same for your audio guide, same for your digital transformation. We are calling upon companies for many different issues, but during the pandemic, we decided to accelerate our transition to a model that is more sustainable. You may know that climate is experiencing some very significant upheavals. If we want to be optimistic, the trajectories are bringing about heating of the planet, an increase of the temperature that is happening quite quickly. And everything is happening today as if the world of culture was not made aware of these messages. It's not just the world of culture. Many people tend to forget the IPCC reports and these alarming articles written by scientists. We have decided with the Palais Tokyo, but there's several of us committing to this. We've decided to accelerate our approach of transition. It cannot be just ecological, because these issues are really linked to social issues. There won't be an in-depth transformation of our models if there's no gender equality and inclusive models. And this is what we work on with our CSR. We're not working on our CSR alone. We are working with partners like companies. Why? Because companies have a know-how that we don't have. Starting in the 1990s, the companies were placed under pressure from public opinion because a link was made very quickly in the minds and in the facts between the corporate world and pollution and thus responsibility. When you produce things in large quantities, public opinion is asking you to be accountable with regards to what you're producing. So companies have had to really embark on the corporate social responsibility piece, and they've had to reduce their footprint, whether it is carbon footprint or social footprint in the world. And we have said when we started this with the Palais Tokyo, we felt that we would find support from these companies and some skills, because the world of culture is lacking these skills in terms of this transition. And it is the program that we've launched in 2020 that offers companies a unique format of philanthropy, which is a financial sponsoring contribution, which is classic. But this comes alongside the contribution of their skills on transition. So there are two circles for this: art and society, which commits alongside the Palais Tokyo on a care center, which is inclusive and educational space that is going to open at the end of the year, and an art and ecology space that helps the companies participate in this environmental transition. We have mobilized 10 of our sponsors and raised 1 million euros to work on this. What projects are we going to work on? I'm not going to give names, but we have a company whose business is carbon assessments and defining strategies for the reduction of GHG emissions. They're supporting us also to look at our carbon footprint, because very few companies have done this as well. We have real estate companies helping us financially, but also supporting us to renovate the Palais Tokyo as we go by, to make the building more sustainable. We are also going to be supported by an alcohol company that has worked on defining tools to define their carbon footprint, so that every single one of our exhibition be mastered. So when you buy your ticket at the with the train, you can see the carbon footprint also of visiting the exhibition. And I think that's a first stage to improve ourselves. And that's for art and ecology. And for art and society, we're also going to develop cross-cutting sponsoring. Some companies are going to mobilize the programs that they have for their employees or with nonprofits and cross them with programs that we have of education and well-being through art in this dedicated center that will be called the Hamlet. And this welcomes every public and makes sure that people with physical or mental disability are taken care of. And this is how we mobilize these sponsors. It's part more widely of a transformation of our institution. I'm not going to be too lengthy, but today it is a project that is working well. We've started it for 2 years, and it is something that is going to continue. The first announcements of major trajectories will be made for the exhibition Réclamer la Terre, which opens on the 15th of April. And we will talk with the artists to on this topic of questioning our link to what is living. Well, we have a little time for questions. I'm going to come back to your various projects and on what really defines them. I have a question on how you manage to create trust, because sometimes it's a little bit intimidating to enter a museum, even when it's the fishing museum or a contemporary art museum. So how are you successful to create this trust with people who are going to commit themselves for a long time to create these audio guides or these podcasts? Well, the role of nonprofits are really important, friends of the museum. So they love their museum and they're real ambassadors. So we also need to look at what the shop owners can do, because we attract a lot of visitors in Pont-Aven. So we work with the city, with our neighbors, to try and cross this threshold. I really admire the 104 in Paris. We would love our museums to be places where we can get in very easily when it rains and say, what am I doing with my kids? Well, I'm going to go to the museum. It's great. We're going to play. We're going to discover things. And it's also our role as professionals to show that museums are not intimidating, and there are many things that we can do along these lines. Well, we love hospitality, and our place is an open place for practice, and it's their space that continues to transform. I could say the exact same things. We also count a lot on our partners of all sorts, whether these are social partners, education partners, or other partners, tourism partners sometimes. And our door is open because we are museum with contemporary art. So that kind of has people running away from us. And we want to show that these are very welcoming words, and it's what you were saying as well. It's through the fact that making people understand that a place like this is first and foremost a place for living. And this meant that we can find things that you want to find ourselves, to spend time with your family, with your friends, to sit in the garden, to look at the time that goes by. So it's not just an educational approach or an intimidation of art. You can have lunch, you can spend some time outside the chaos of the rest of the world. And that's what we trust as well. So for us, it's very important because it allows us to do this link. So it also shows me that they are the witness of their times, and it also reveals the desire of the moment. On pro bono work, Abla and Mathieu, you were talking about new skills that in cultural institutions don't have, those on maybe cross-sectional aspects and the capacities of the digital. And how do you perceive these skills in terms of duration? I was wondering, is it there for 1 year, 2 years? And I was wondering the same question with your various partners. How does it happen? These people come, do they have an office? Because it's already hard to have office space for our teams. Patrick was there for 1 year, and I was able to hire him for good. So now he is an agent of the Center of National Monuments. And when I started saying that I had an opportunity for an pro bono work, I had a lot of negative reaction, and I was told, watch out, pro bono work, you're going to have profiles of people who might not be competent. And I think it comes from a history of pro bono work a few years ago. It wasn't that developed. And I saw that it was multiplied by 4 in 5 years. So it's a real trend. And a few years ago, it was more consulting firms that used their junior partners on these pro bono work. So there was a lot of fear internally with regards to this. And Patrick came, and I think that there were also some success factors that I interviewed Patrick. I was ready to refuse the pro bono work if the profile wasn't what we were looking for. It was a project that was well defined with objectives for about a period of a year. There was also an alignment in terms of value. We spoke about engagement, commitment, and I think that is good as well in terms of integration within a team, within an organization. So very quickly, he just really fit right in. Thank you. From our side, I just want to be alongside with Abla on the evolution of pro bono work in France. There's a greater professionalization of the sector, and we're going from a sponsoring of opportunity to a sponsoring of initiatives. Just positioning a logo at the bottom of a poster as a support for an exhibition is not something that the companies want to do anymore. They want to commit themselves. They want to get their employees involved, and that's important for them. In terms of the pro bono work, there's also the question of trust. How do we create this trust? Well, first of all, I think that the art center or the museum being part of society is fundamental. So why do you go there? You go there to meet the artists, but also because it's a place that's not outside of society. It's a place where you meet all of the issues that you come across. Equality, inclusion, education. So all of the fights that are ours and all of the commitments that we can have on a daily basis, that's what you have. On trust, the criticism that we can have is not internal, it's more external. But aren't you afraid that you might have a loss of independence because of your sponsors? On the question of transitions, this program, by combining this financial sponsoring with this pro bono work sponsoring, there's a risk to have a big check and do whatever we want because we're at home. And then we want to accentuate the participation of the company alongside the employees of the Palais Tokyo. We create a virtuous model. Then there's the issue of the overall training of the employees, which is something that we do on the topic of CSR. We've created a committee that involves all of the departments of the Palais Tokyo with reference people. So we are inside of the RSC committee, and they meet once a month, and they encourage this, and there's a training that are more general and training by métier on questions that are social and environmental. So you have people in front of you who have increased their skills, and you can continue to further develop their skills. If you talk with the head of Danone, for instance, and that's not the case because Danone doesn't come to us. We want them to come to us because they were the ones would be the first ones to commit to have a raison d'être, and it's something that is educational. It's always interesting to see how a company does this transition and trains itself on these issues and to see the issues that they have to face. Even if it's a company that can seem very remote from the business of the Palais Tokyo, it goes both ways. It's true that we also need to convince our management of sponsoring. We need to get out of the purely financial sponsoring. We need to convince potential sponsors and talk about the diversification of skills and the opening and the engagement, and to make people who are demanding for this come in. So you have groups that offer breathing spaces of 1, 2, 3, 6, 12 months of breathing space for their employees to be involved with CSR. Well, the skills inspire us within our institutions. We have an incubator like you with the CNM, and the skills of the entrepreneurs really inspire us. And we can see this with the young generations of entrepreneurs who can be more experienced as they start in entrepreneurship, and we can train our employees on topics that we don't really master very well, how to live virtual reality, or how to think about designing our buildings in an eco-responsible way. So it's a great way to improve the skills back and forth. And maybe for people who work in companies like Nokia, for instance, to have inspirational places to work in, because working in institutional places, we're lucky to work in incredible places, and to allow people who work in business districts and towers and plants to be able to work in these culture venues, in these living venues where there's a lot of emotions and meetings with the artists. I don't know if we have time for the questions in the room. We have 2 minutes. I'm sorry, I would have loved to give you the floor a little bit more. So how is this going to happen? Hello. My name is Caroline Pujol. I have 2 points. Personally, I've spent 18 years in large companies. I've worked for Sodexo, Alcatel-Lucent. I've worked in the deployment of information systems, and now I'm trying to create a business. I've spent 15 years in China. I'm working in Malaysia right now. So I want to say something. I have plenty of buddies who work a great life and making a lot of money as traders in big banks, who just they can't stand their job anymore. And pro bono work was a breath of fresh air in their lives. And to support a young woman, we always feel that pro bono work is asking a little bit of money, and people are ashamed to ask for money. You need to change this paradigm. You come from Orange. It's a chance that we give to the companies to give themselves more meaning. Companies have 3 issues. The first one is to hire young people. They do not want to work in big companies because there's no meaning. The young people don't stay. There's a huge problem of attrition. In Asia, it's striking. And the third thing you said, it's externalization. We outsource a lot in terms of innovation. Why do we do this? Because we're all on the same model. We've all done the same business school or the same engineering school. I'm an engineer, and I think that the sponsoring, this pro bono work, is something that we do that gives a tremendous opportunity to companies, and I'm really happy to hear you say that. The second thing I wanted to say has to do with Asia. 15 years in China and Malaysia. There's a lot of professional opportunities. I'm in line with a city in Malaysia that is trying to get expats coming in. I was in Avignon next to Luma, the art center. And why are people going to come? Because we're going to give meaning, and a company is going to become a venue. So I'm sorry, it really wasn't a question. It was more of a comment. Thank you. Thank you very much for speaking up on what pro bono work can contribute. Let us move now to the second part of our roundtable. So thank you again to you all. Thank you. This is very inspirational. We would have loved to continue to debate and talk about these competencies. Now we're going to turn to the medical sector with two experiences that are going to be shared here with Emmanuel de DEMARCY-MOTA, who is the director of the Théâtre de la Ville, and Delphine Houba, who is in charge of culture, tourism, and events, and of the equipment of the city for the city of Brussels.